should stop collecting revolutionary taxes, which are, in the militarist vocabulary, are plain and simple extortion. Joining us today, NDFT Peace Negotiator Ray Casambre is also the Executive Director of the Philippine Peace Center. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Christian.
A lot of things to look forward to, especially that the former peace talks are set to resume in 2 weeks. But again, we heard the President again utter certain words to the effect that they might be considered as conditions. Now, among them, this was mentioned in Myanmar over the weekend. He mentioned the need for the NPA, the New People's Army, to stop the collection of New People's Army. First, before we go to the details of this, how do you see these pronouncements by the President, given that both sides have formally or officially agreed to resume peace talks?
Well, it only means that these issues become part of the agenda. Especially, we will be talking about forging a bilateral ceasefire. There's an agreement to do that. So most of the issues which have been raised as quote-unquote conditions are really subject to discussion, subject to negotiation, therefore part of the agenda.
I remember, sir, in the past, in previous peace negotiations, you don't technically talk about conditions because the basic template is that there should be no preconditions for talks.
Yes. That's correct.
Why do you think those words came out of the mouth of the President? Do you think it's just a matter of lack of, for example, sufficient knowledge about the nuances of words that you use during peace negotiations?
Well, we can allow a lot of flexibility in the pronouncements, especially outside the negotiating table, since, they're not negotiating per se. When we talk about the nuances about and the strictness in the language, that applies across the negotiating table. Outside, you can't be so strict.
Okay. So you can allow the President to utter those statements. But the public perception is that he is the head of the government, and the government peace panel takes its instructions straight from the President. So somehow, if you're talking about the public perception, there might be certain mixed signals coming from the peace panel and from the President himself.
That's true, and for that reason, we can also appreciate the efforts of the negotiating panel of the government, especially Secretary Doresa, who is the head of the OPA, the advisor on the peace process, made those public clarifications also that actually what has been enumerated as conditions are really issues that have to be addressed during the negotiations.
Okay, so it's clear that you see them as issues, not conditions, because otherwise there's no reason to resume the talks.
Yes.
Now let's talk about the details of those issues or conditions set by the President. Number one, you shouldn't demand, the New People's Army shouldn't collect revolutionary taxes. Now let's put that in the context of your revolutionary government, because we've been hearing this back and forth. The military and the police refer to them as extortion. But what is really what is the context of the collection of revolutionary taxes?
The context is that the reality is that there exists dual political power, especially in the countryside. So, of course, you cannot expect the government to acknowledge or to admit that. But since you are negotiating, then even without the admission, there is a tacit recognition that there is that dual authority. Otherwise, there won't be any reason for negotiations. So what the military and maybe other, even the media would call extortion, the NPA, the CPP, the NDF refer to it as revolutionary taxation, in just the same way that government imposes taxes on its constituency. Then the NDF also has that authority and that need to be able to provide the services that the people in their territory, or what they claim or they say is their territory, to be able to receive these services.
But I think the concern that is often highlighted by, especially if you talk with the military, is that in collecting these revolutionary taxes, there's this element of force. For example, certain businessmen are forced to pay up taxes. That's why they tend to refer to them as extortion.
It's a matter of language. You see, the fact that this has been going on for decades means that it's reality. Businessmen, whether they are forced or not, they do pay those taxes because they deem it to be necessary for their commercial or business operations. In other words, there is also acceptance on the part of the businessmen who pay those taxes. In the same way that a lot of businessmen would rather not, or in fact do not, pay their real taxes to the government.
But for the record, this collection of revolutionary taxes won't stop during the peace negotiations.
During the peace negotiations, no, because the dual authority still exists, and that is something that could be a subject to discussion over the negotiating table, especially when you go into the agreement on social and economic reforms. That could be covered also in the agreement on political and constitutional reforms. Those issues will be covered.
So now let's go to the other issue mentioned by the President. Basically, your group was told not to, or the New People's Army was told not to, let's just use the word group. You shouldn't ask the military and the police to actually proceed to the communities. And for example, the words that you use actually are, they're trying to occupy or take over certain health centers, schools, and other facilities in the communities. Now, there's this, again, back and forth between both sides because for the military, the NPA has no right to demand that they shouldn't proceed with those activities because you do not have a territory to speak of. How do you respond to that?
Well, again, this is subject to negotiation. There are two levels of when we say that occupation. One is occupation of territory. The other is occupation of schools, hospitals, or medical centers, even the barangay halls, etc. Meaning civilian institutions or which are violative of international humanitarian law. And there is an agreement, the Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law, which explicitly prohibit these acts. So whether or not there is recognition of, there could be a debate on whether this area is territory or not. There is no debate on the question of you are not allowed to occupy schools, meaning you are not allowed to use schools and other institutions as your detachment or outpost.
So that's what you mean?
Which the military is doing.
That's what you mean when you say occupy?
Yes, that is one level of meaning.
Now, there's also this concern. We've been hearing about this during the peace process, during the peace negotiations, that somehow both sides are trying to gain leverage while their negotiators are actually negotiating officially. For example, during this peace process under the Duterte administration, the military alleged that the NPA has been very aggressively recruiting more and more members despite the ongoing peace talks. And from your end, the allegation is that the military was trying to occupy a lot of territories that belong to the New People's Army. So you have this this struggle for greater leverage during the discussions. How do you intend to resolve this when you resume formal talks?
That is why the agenda, part of the agenda during the fourth round is the trying to forge an agreement on a bilateral ceasefire. The problem or the situation when you have a unilateral ceasefire on both sides is that they dictate or they dictate the terms of their ceasefire. and they will not be held accountable for actions which are not prohibited by their declaration. And this is the case in the unilateral ceasefire where the ceasefire declaration of the government, particularly the SOMO and the SOPO orders, these are the suspension of offensive military operations and suspension of offensive police operations. They assert that the peace and development so-called operations or the law enforcement operations shall continue even during the ceasefire. Now, on the part of the NPA, these so-called peace and development operations are perceived to be hostile acts.
Yeah. You mentioned that term. That's very tricky, right? Hostile acts.
Yes.
Because on the part of the government, that's plain and simple law enforcement activities.
Yes.
Which are part of their mandate.
Yes. So it's a matter of point of view.
So how do you
in the same way that government views the revolutionary tax and other NPA and CPP activities as hostile acts, but which the CPP and NPA would say, no, this is a practice of our political authority.
Basically, you have a lot of issues to resolve. Definitely.
Yes, so when you sit down for a bilateral ceasefire, you can define, you can have common definitions or agreements on what constitute hostile acts. So that would be an improvement over the unilateral ceasefire.
So 2 weeks to go before the resumption of peace talks on the part of the New People's Army, when is the NPA expected to declare a unilateral ceasefire?
As far as I understand, it has to be soon because there's an agreement to have the declaration before the start of the 4th round. And my understanding is that the declarations will be, the declaration of unilateral ceasefire by both will be done simultaneously.